Natasha Hausdorff, a barrister and international law expert, on the story that broke late yesterday that basically the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the former Defence Minister of Israel Yoav Gallant, and the Hamas military leader Mohammed Deif for war crimes in Gaza. Natasha, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Very good to be with you.
Good to talk to you. It's a very bizarre situation, this, it seems to me. When I saw the story yesterday, I thought I couldn't quite believe my eyes. But we were talking to Lord Daniel Finkelstein just a moment ago, and he said that it worries him that the ICC is kind of losing credibility. It seems to me they lost their credibility a while ago, didn't they?
Well, unfortunately so. Already in 2012, there was a resounding criticism of the ICC having spent nearly $1 billion to secure one conviction, and subsequently its focus almost exclusively on African defendants led in 2020 an independent expert review panel to double down on that criticism and accuse it of failing to live up to its mandate. So I think this recent development can be explained in very simple terms. This is the ICC wishing to rehabilitate itself by going after very easy targets here, the Jewish state and the leaders thereof. This is not a decision that has been based in international law, in the jurisdiction of the ICC, even in the rules of the court, which require it to comply with what's called the principle of complementarity and make sure that Israel has an opportunity to investigate any credible allegations against Israelis. So put quite simply, for any of us that have actually looked at the detail of the process by which this decision has been reached, and also the information that has been put before the court, which is not just woefully inadequate, it's been false, and it's been proven to be false, including by an independent review by UK Lawyers for Israel of the material that the prosecutor has publicised. Despite all of this, I think it's extremely important that we take a strong stance, that we hold the court to account for its failure to comply with its own rules, its own jurisdiction, and call out the weaponization of international courts in this fashion. Yeah,
and in terms of the actual, rolling out of the arrest warrant, what is the legal position in countries like Britain, in other countries in Europe who are signatories to the ICC? Because, Keir Starmer seems to be a bit confused. I mean, he's supposed to be a lawyer. He's a human rights lawyer. My sense is that, his sympathies lie closer to the ICC than they do to Israel, but he can't really say that. What does it actually mean? Is Britain, if Benjamin Netanyahu was to visit Britain, which I presume he won't now, but if he was to visit, is Britain legally obligated then to arrest him?
Well, there is a sense in which I don't perhaps blame him for his confusion, because albeit according to the letter of the Rome Statute, arrest warrants properly issued would have to be respected by parties to the Rome Statute. Given the absence of jurisdiction, given the fact that the rules have been thrown out of the window, there is a justifiable question as to whether it is incumbent on members of the ICC to call this out and to say, up with this, we will not put. Not to get too philosophical on you for this early in the morning, but there is a big debate, jurisprudential debate, about the validity of decisions. I mean, if I use one particularly commonly deployed example, the courts in Nazi Germany put out many rulings that were technically, legally sound, but of course morally absolutely repugnant, and whether or not they ought to have been complied with and upheld is now a question that we answer pretty plainly and flatly. So there is a moral responsibility on all countries that actually respect the rule of law, and international law in particular, to call out what is essentially support for an internationally prescribed terrorist organisation, because at a macro level here, what this decision is advertising to the world is that Western liberal democratic states like Israel, like the UK, like the US, are not permitted to exercise lawful self-defense. And when they comply with the laws of armed conflict, they will be defamed, they will be lied about. The misrepresentations that are propagated on international media will then be used to fuel political agendas against them at international courts. And that's why the UK needs to be taking this extremely seriously, because what starts with Israel, I'm afraid to say, is very unlikely to end with Israel.
Well, quite. And I pointed this out to Daniel Finkelstein, that, slightly complicated as it is, this particular story, further complicated by Karim Khan, who is the sort of chief prosecutor, it seems, a British barrister who seems obsessed with Israel. He's at the centre of a whole bunch of sexual allegations, sexual harassment allegations, which have surfaced in the last few months. And I wonder whether he's activated, shall we say, by the fact that, you know, he could be in a position where he loses his job if that all comes out to be something that he's found guilty of. And maybe this is just his way of kind of creating a distraction.
Well, Mike, because there's an ongoing investigation into that, I'm reluctant to comment on it. But what I think is important to stress is that the information that the prosecutor put before the court, the information upon which this decision has been based, has been shown to be false. Every phrase of every sentence of the public statement that the prosecutor put out summarising his application has shown to be false, and it has also been disproven by subsequent independent reports. For example, this canard of starvation has been debunked by a subsequent famine review committee report. Right. Despite that, and despite the prosecutor being put on notice of this, he not only refused to review his own position, but he actually told the court to ignore submissions from any friends of the court, amicus curiae, who'd made representations about the inaccuracy of that material. That is why UK Lawyers for Israel, after putting him on notice of these failings, have made a subsequent complaint to the Bar Standards Board, because, as you say, barristers in the United Kingdom, regulated, do have obligations to the court, especially to ensure that they are not being misled, that judges are not being misled. And I'm very sorry to say that this decision clearly appears to have been based on that false information. There's no indication that the judges have taken into account the contravening information that has been put through, the expulcatory evidence that has been presented to it. And this is unfortunately not something new. Already in October, when the prosecutor visited Rafah, on the border between Egypt and Gaza, and then subsequently gave a press conference in Cairo, and this was just at the very beginning of the war against Hamas, we saw this legal professional inverting the burden and standard of proof. He said that the crimes of Hamas would need to be investigated, the alleged crimes of Hamas, forgive me, those were his words, but that Israel was required to prove that it was complying with international humanitarian law in the Gaza Strip. Now, every law student learns in their first week at university studying criminal law that the burden and standard of proof is on the prosecution, innocent until proven guilty. Well, that was also thrown out of the window. And then we saw this absurd attempt, perhaps, to feign some form of impartiality by issuing an arrest warrant against a dead man. Even Hamas acknowledged some 3 weeks ago that Mohammed Daif is no longer with us. So along with Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh, the other targets of arrest warrants by Karim Khan, the idea that the court would seek to balance and draw some sort of morally repugnant equivalence between the democratic leaders of the only democracy in the Middle East and the international prescribed terrorist organization and their leaders is deeply, deeply problematic. So you see, we start to unpick so many levels of real problem, of inversion, and ultimately the only explanation for all of this is the continued weaponization of international courts against the only Jewish state.
Yeah, I'm afraid it looks very much like that.